So, moving on to our next topic of the day, this kind of coincides with how the NFL is handling this whole preseason debate. A lot of players have been coming out recently and stating their displeasure with the NFL regarding their safety precautions that they've been doing. They claim that the NBA is doing a much better job of putting their players into a safe environment, making them feel safe with this sort of bubble and the type of safety measures that they're doing regarding the temperatures, the leaving and going, all this type of stuff. JJ Watt was actually one of the biggest players that actually went into some details about how the NFL is handling things and a little bit more. If you wanted to touch on that a little bit, Jimmy.
Yeah, so let's look at JJ Watt's tweet. First of all, I like the hashtag we want to play. That's a good positive
Hmm.
message that the players are sending, and that's a good, hopeful, optimistic sign. So JJ Watt immediately starts out, we want to play. Second point, we want to be as safe as possible, of course. Third point, the NFL can mandate that players show up to training camp regardless if any agreement has been reached between the NFL and NFLPA. I think that's right of the NFL to be able to do that.
Hmm.
The next point was we still have not been granted the full proper training camp acclimation period necessary as recommended by the medical and training staffs. Now, apparently the medical staff has been recommending a 21-day acclimation period.
Hmm.
It seems like it'd be pretty easy for the NFL to go ahead and let the players have that, even though I don't know if that's really necessary. On a
Yeah.
typical offseason, there's about 6 weeks between the last OTA and training camp. So there's already time off before training camps.
Hmm.
And players do have some responsibility of themselves to keep themselves in shape too. So I'm not going to have a whole lot of sympathy if that 21-day acclimation period is cut down to 15 or 10.
Yeah.
The next point is we still do not know if there will be daily testing or every other day testing, et cetera. Well, I don't know if the doctors even know. And it is also going to depend on how much testing is available. Every city might be different. So these are very difficult things that the NFL and the NFL medical doctors may not even know at this point.
Yeah.
Another point is we still do not know how a positive COVID test will be handled in regards to others in close contact, such as in the huddle, directly engaged with, etc. There are a couple players like Russell Wilson who had tweeted that he's got a pregnant wife at home. Again, this is another issue where I don't think doctors know either at
Yeah.
this point. These things are up in the air and may change during the season, depending on developments regarding COVID. So I don't know if it's fair of players to expect that we know for sure how things are going to be handled.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That's like everything is still up in the air. We don't even know what's happening. I mean, in the country and how they're planning on handling things with schools getting ready to go back and universities getting ready to go back. And it's really a toss up with just everything on how everything is trying to be handled right now. So again, they're just pretty much learning as they go day by day.
The players do need to give the NFL and the doctors some allowance that there's still so much we don't know. And nobody can keep the players perfectly safe. No one can expect that. That's just
Hmm.
not a fair thing to do. So let's talk about the next point that JJ Watt tweeted as a strong and fair opt out clause for those at higher risk or those with family members at higher risk has still not been agreed upon. Now, this is something I wanted to get into a little bit more. I tweeted about this, which is I believe the NFL and the NFLPA should keep all at risk language out of it. The reason is it's too hard to define what it means to be at risk. Risk lies along a spectrum. And with something like COVID, where we don't know much about it, there are going to be so many differing doctor opinions that it's almost meaningless. So if they include any at-risk language, you're going to deal with a lot of disagreements. You're going to deal with legal battles, deal with PR negativity, just like what we saw with the Elena Deladong issue with the WNBA. She says she has Lyme disease and was not granted a full salary opt out. So the NFL is going to have hundreds of those
Yeah.
if they include any at risk language.
It's going to be real interesting to see. And as you mentioned earlier, I like certain players have even possibly families that could be at risk or something like that. So there's a lot more at risk than just like I know you said a lot of these players are young and healthy and should be expected to have their bodies in shape and be ready. But again, even if they have families, young kids, or elderly people that with their families that they're living with or that they take care of go see anything yet. So there's a lot more at play than just this health of one player.
Yep. And I think because some players are going to be at higher risk than others, potentially allowing some kind of opt out is important and essential, even though in regular society, not every employer necessarily allows their employees to take 6 months or 12 months off and immediately come back to their job.
Yeah.
So the NFL is already a little bit not similar to the rest of society here.
Hmm.
So the current opt out proposal by the NFL is they must decide before August 1st. I think it would be great if players were able to decide before training camp started, but the NFL may need to allow some kind of opt out during the season in case there's some unforeseen COVID issues, such as significantly increased severity of illness or significantly increased case numbers, or a family member that potentially could have a major issue if they contracted COVID.
Hmm.
They propose that the contract will toll for 1 year, which means basically the contract fast forwards 1 year. So if this is Kenny Galladay and he opts out, then he comes back next year under his fourth year of his current deal. So
Mm.
he's not going to be a free agent. It's just basically like just fast forward in time.
Yeah.
I personally think that's pretty fair from a NFL and player standpoint to do that.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing that the NFL wanted was that you can't renegotiate the contract after you decide to opt out, which I think is the right thing because it helps prevent players from using the opt out as a holdout situation. You really don't want teams or players to be able to abuse the opt out clause.
Yeah, of course. That's the biggest thing because it's kind of like in college, just taking a year of eligibility off of their contract, basically.
Yeah, so let's talk about the risk for a player if he decides to opt out. They potentially could get cut before the next season starts.
Yeah.
Let's take an example of Taylor Decker. He's playing under his fifth year option this year. Let's say he opts out, and Tyrell Crosby comes in, plays really well. Well, next offseason, we might decide, all right, Taylor Decker, you're not totally worth the money. You're cut, or we're not giving you an extension anymore. So
Hmm.
that's one of the risks that will help players want to try to play this year and not just take an opt out year.
Hmm. And plus, the NFL is obviously a lot different than other leagues where, like NBA, baseball, even hockey, you can play into your possibly 40s
Yeah.
sometimes. But in football is a much more young man's game. So those years that you have are precious, and you might not just want to waste one. I mean, again, I know safety concerns and players are in different situations in their lives or with families or whatever. But again, some players might be more reluctant to give up a full year of their salary and all that stuff. So just to
Yeah,
play.
that's a great point. Yeah, the NFL career is significantly less than NBA and MLB.
Hmm.
And with certain positions, it's even shorter, like running back.
Yeah, exactly. Even if they're healthy and they're in their prime, say another year, a whole year off, maybe away from football, because who knows, maybe they haven't been practicing as they normally would during the seasons, and then they slack off a little bit more, and they're not nowhere near as good. And again, you mentioned maybe their play teams decide they're not worth the contract, and there's a lot that can happen in that year if they take a whole year off.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, taking a year off means they're not coming back as the same player. Look back to Mike Williams, who we drafted a long time ago. He
Hmm.
tried to come out in the draft. They wouldn't let him, so he took a full year off from college. Matt Millen still drafted him in the first round, thinking he'd be a great player, pick up right for where from he left off. He didn't. He
Hmm.
was fat, out of shape, and wasn't a very good player.
Yeah, that's a great example of how taking a year off can be a negative impact on a player.